Hello there, Drew Hanish of Whiskey Lore, and time for another whiskey tasting. And today I'm going to be doing a tasting of a whiskey that I have actually done an interview with James Doherty, the co-founder of the Ardara Distillery, also known as Slieve League. And this is in Ireland, in Donegal. And it's one of only, three distilleries now in Donegal. Donegal is grown up over the last couple of years, and now they have three distilleries. But the first barrel to have been distilled in the area legally in 175 years came from the Ardara Distillery. And so, but this is actually sourced whiskey. Okay, this comes from Great Northern Distillery, but it was designed out of single malts and blended with the idea of creating a nice initial peated whiskey for the distillery. And the thing about this distillery is that it is going to change your mind about Irish whiskey. When I went to Ireland, there were a lot of people who still said, well, you know, Scotch is where smoky whiskey comes from. They don't really make smoky whiskeys in Ireland, and that's not true. And it's not traditionally true either, because just like the west coast of Scotland hung with using peat for a long time, peat was a fuel source. So it was used for a long time on the west coast of Ireland as well. But as transportation got better and coal was able to be shipped in, then things changed, and suddenly no more peated Irish whiskeys. And of course, the Irish whiskey industry kind of faded away there in the 20th century. And so a lot of those old traditions were lost. But I'm guessing if it was the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, and you were in Donegal, you were probably drinking a smoky whiskey. And so James and his wife Moira have decided that they want their distillery to be known as a peated distillery, or as the Irish call it, turf. Now, I did an interview with him. Go back and check that out if you get a chance to. Had a great conversation with him. It's here on YouTube or also on the podcast. And we went through all the background on this. I took my bottle, and I have to be careful of this with really good whiskey that I want to hang on to. I had probably drank about that much out of it, and then I went to my family's Easter celebration last year. No, Thanksgiving celebration, and I took this and Lima Vadia with me, and I didn't come back with either one. That tells you how much the family enjoyed it. All right, let's talk about this little logo here, or this design that we have. This, if it looks sort of like a mermaid, well, in a way, that is what the Selkie is, spelled with a S-E or an S-I. This is a folklore tradition. Basically, the Selkie is a seal-like shapeshifter who would leave its skin on the shore, and as folklore would have it, occasionally a man would come along, see the woman there without her skin, and would marry her, and then they would have children, and then at some point she would look longingly at the sea, knowing that's where her home was, and she would find her skin, and she would go back to the ocean, leaving her husband and children to fend for themselves. There's a second related, in a way, I can't find that they are actually, I don't find references to these two together, but if you've ever been to Scotland between Edinburgh and Stirling in Falkirk, there are these huge horse heads called the Kelpies. And Kelpies, for whiskey lore fans, you will know the Corey Vrecken story of the Kelpie of Corey Vrecken. Kelpies were more surrounded, still water creatures, but they were more surrounded around the lochs more than out on the coast. And they were horses that were shapeshifters, and then they would turn into lovely maidens as well. So very interesting. If you want to go back, I have put that up on YouTube also. So just do a search on the Kelpies of Corey Vrecken, and you can hear actually a British actor who I hired to do a reading of a story by Charles MacLean, I think it was, who wrote the story. And so you'll get to hear one of those fantastic tales in that particular episode, especially if you like Corey Vrecken, because it talks about the whirlpool that Ardbeg's Corey Vrecken is named after, another smoky whiskey. Let's go on and do a nosing and tasting of this. I had actually gone to Kentucky and Tennessee, and I usually go looking for whiskeys that I can't find locally there, and I could not find this. Surprise, I walk into my local whiskey shop 2 days ago, and they have it. So I snagged it as soon as I could. It was $47 for a bottle of it. And I was looking at some other whiskeys. I was going to buy Ugadal because of its championship victory in bracketology. But honestly, at $89 to $95 for that, I said, you know what? I'll buy the rare breed and I'll buy this. It'll be a little more expensive, but I'm getting 2 bottles of whiskey instead of 1. Can you blame me? So anyway, you can thank my trip to the store for my rare breed and for the Selkie. Now, this is aged in ex-bourbon barrels initially, but then it is additionally aged in imperial stout beer casks as well as virgin oak casks. So we might expect to maybe get a little mouthfeel out of that stout cask. Another thing that James really wants is to have a non-aggressive whiskey, but not as non-aggressive as, say, a Jameson, which is over-distilled. The idea here being that you want a smoky character, but you don't want it to be too pungent. And that's something that some people will find out of, speaking of Ardbeg, maybe, you know, Wee Beastie or one of those particular whiskeys. So no age statement on this one. Don't know how old the whiskey is that's in here, but do know that it all came from single malts blended together. Because they are blended together, and if they all came from the Great Northern Distillery, you could still consider it a single malt. But if it has come from multiple distilleries, then you would not be able to call this a single malt. See all the education you get here? All right, we got mythical sea creatures, we got laws of single malt, and we have a citrus and smoke blend on the nose. And I didn't really pick this up in my first bottle of this, but I'm getting it here in this one, is a citrus note that is blending perfectly with that smoke to a point where it almost becomes its own scent. It's also very herbally. There's something about this that reminds me of rye whiskey, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's that herbally nature that I'm pulling out of this. A little orchard fruit. The smoke is always there. It is always in anything that you're smelling. It's hard to separate it from anything else. Cheers. So it does have that really nice mouthfeel to it. It's not a heavy whiskey, but it feels nice. And some people may think that this is called Silkie because it's supposed to be silky whiskey. Maybe I could see that coming out, but that's not the reason for the name of the whiskey. But it does actually give you a nice mouthfeel along with a grain note coming in there, along with the smoke. Smoke is always very prominent. Some of that citrus note in there, and I get a little bit of dark chocolate in this as well. I don't get as much interplay from the bourbon barrel as maybe I did in the first whiskey that I tried, because I did list that I was getting toffee notes, and I'm not really getting those as much as I'm getting some of the orchard fruit notes in this. I think it's a very, very intriguing whiskey, and it's one of those that I'm glad I got a second bottle of it, and it will probably become a staple, same as, say, a Talisker, or, there's certain whiskeys that I just know I'm always going to have. Lefroy 10, I'm always going to have Lefroy 10 cask strength in my cabinet somewhere, and I think this is one of those whiskeys that's going to join the ranks of those will always be in the cabinet. So, very nice. Have you had it? What do you think about the idea of Irish smoky whiskey? Do you, as a Scotch drinker, would you venture into the world of Irish whiskey to try because the only one that a lot of people know is Connemara, and I can tell you that Connemara is not as smoky as this is, but that this, for the Connemara fan, may be a nice next step to get you into smoky whiskeys because it's got a really nice flavor to it. Hope you enjoyed this. Subscribe if you'd like to watch more of these videos down the road. Love your comments. Leave them below, and always glad to have you here. Until next time, cheers and Slainte. Nice orchard fruit. Now standing out more on the second sip and or third sip, and that smoke.